Hey, I'm Mike Gilliam, and welcome to Let It Rip. No, he didn't. Well, yes, he did. And now John Gruden is out, no longer the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. The former Super Bowl winning head coach resigned in disgrace after disgusting email surfaced, in which, while writing to former Washington football team general manager Bruce Allen, he used racist, sexist, and homophobic language, all first reported by the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. According to the Times, he called NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell horrible names. It all started when he wrote a 2011 email to Allen and said of the Players Association head, DeMaurice Smith, who was black, quote, "Dumb Morris Smith has lips the size of Michelin tires." At the time, Gruden was not coaching, but working for ESPN. He later signed a 10-year, $100 million contract with the Raiders. That's just a little of what the emails, which surfaced in an unrelated investigation into workplace misconduct of Bruce Allen and the Washington football team, show. There's a lot to discuss here. Joining us, we have a sociology professor at Brooklyn College, Lawrence Johnson. His research explores racism and the intersection between sports and Black masculinity. Michele Gregory is a behavioral science professor at York College and the daughter of civil rights activist and humorist Dick Gregory. And Bill Daughtry, retired ESPN radio sportscaster extraordinaire. Welcome to all of you. Bill, let's start with you. Were you surprised by the emails and Gruden?
No, none of this stuff surprises me, Mike. We always talk about entitlement, white entitlement, and white fragility. And people don't want to hear anything about that, but those emails are just further evidence that white folks in positions of power feel they can pretty much do and say anything they want. Sometimes they feel like they're doing it undercover, but they don't realize the digital world, everything is on record forever. You can't get rid of it. And what surprised me most about the Gruden story was not that he said what he said, not who he was saying it about, not who he was sharing it with, but as a former employee of ESPN, that someone didn't know something about this kind of thing, because that kind of behavior isn't tolerated at that company. And I worked there very happily for 11 plus years.
So you think they did not know?
If they did, they kept it to themselves. But, I find it hard to believe that they didn't know. For them to go into your email, even if it is company, there has to be some kind of red flag. Somebody has to say something or do something, as we saw with the entire situation with the young lady that was hosting the jump off. She said something to an employee she thought was in confidence. The employee recorded it, and later it was disseminated or leaked, and things got kind of stupid. Now, I don't know if that kind of protocol was in play in the Gruden situation, if somebody heard something or knew something, or better yet, if he had emailed someone within the company who didn't say something about it, because like I said, I worked there for 11 years and I know Disney doesn't tolerate that stuff for like a half a second.
Okay. Michele, what was your reaction to the emails?
Similar, to what Bill said. Certainly not surprising at all. And I think for me, an additional factor was because of research that I've done many years ago in the executive male locker room. This was the male executive locker room that took place amongst corporate elites, but it's very similar social demographics. And that in this locker room, there's trust. And within that trust, privilege, as Bill talked about, unapologetic behavior. And it's a place where you can let your hair down, even when it comes to denigrating other groups of people. And so the big picture is we got to look into that particular locker room. And, a small slice of it, there's 650,000 emails. And so they just released a few. But even though many people knew or assumed this, that look in is critical. And, with that is the weaponry that is using Black bodies, using denigrating language for women and gay men. It's not just used against minorities, that's used against hegemonic and the dominant culture men. So the comments that were made to Roger Goodell about Joe Biden, And so it's again how those bodies are commodified, women, gay men, Black people, brown people. And so in and of itself, the stereotypes used against those groups, but the weaponry of it when you want to attack white elite men to tell them you are inferior, okay? Even though, yes, you have a place at this table, at this locker room.
Mm-hmm. How do you think your father would have reacted to this?
I mean, well, obviously being a great humorist, civil rights activist, he would have put it in a context that I'm certainly not even capable of doing. But I remember decades ago, and some of the work he did with Native Americans, because clearly the trove of emails speaks to the lamenting that they have to give up the name, the denigrative, the racial epithet that was used. And I remember my dad many decades ago talking to a group of Native Americans about the term that was used. And some of the Native Americans said, just so you folks in the audience really understand this, and it was largely white and Black folks in the audience, he said, think about if we named a team, and I'll just use initials, the N word and the H word for white people. Right. That's what it is. Simply, that's what it is.
Mm-hmm. Lawrence, what does this say about the National Football League and pro sports in general?
Well, this is the same league that still blackballed Colin Kaepernick, right? So, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that, when it comes to the NFL, and, I think the NBA has a better reputation, but we're dealing with, very profitable businesses that deals with Black players as commodities, as Michele just said. And the ultimate reality for Black players is that they're fungible. If they can make money, then they can be part of the business model at the lowest form. But DeMaurice is someone who's negotiating contracts for a players union, and he's seen as an inherent problem, right? So when we think about the NBA, the NFL, we're talking about businesses that use Black players for profit, but there's still a fundamental issue in which Black players are still tainted with the undeniable fact of anti-Blackness. So they'll be tolerated as much as they make money, and then at the point where they're no longer profitable, it's best to get rid of them. So the fact that Jon Gruden has, these type of, emails floating around, I think they're pretty mild, probably compared to, what's understood amongst owners and GMs and, whoever else.
Mm-hmm. Bill, do you think this is a sign that the problems of race are much more pervasive in the NFL than we might have realized?
Pervasive from coast to coast and border to border, man. You're in America. One of the greatest movie lines ever spoken was Fiddler talking to Kunta Kinte or Toby. And he said, you're in America now. And that's the way it is here. And we're fighting tooth and nail to change it. Just to go back to something that Lawrence said a couple of seconds ago with Colin Kaepernick, it took Roger Goodell over 2 years to finally let the words come out of his mouth. That
Black Lives Matter.
That's after the fact. And I mean, what was Colin Kaepernick protesting? He wasn't protesting the flag, the military. He was protesting the way the police treat Black people in this country. And it took the commissioner of that league, where everyone just buried the guy and blacklisted him, and he can't play anymore. That playing thing is long gone anyway for him now. But it took them, almost 3 years to come to the realization that, you know what? This guy's telling the truth. He's talking about something we need to pay attention to. And that's the way it is for white folks in this country. They don't care about it until it's on their front doorstep. You look at opioid problems, you look at COVID problems, any problem you want to name, they don't give a damn about it until it gets to their front porch.
And we really haven't heard much from the commissioner on this. The NFL issued a statement after the emails were leaked saying basically the email from Jon Gruden denigrating DeMaurice Smith is appalling, abhorrent, and wholly contrary to the NFL's values. We condemn the statement and regret any harm that its publication may inflict on Mr. Smith or anyone else, but that's pretty much it. Now, Michele, I believe you think this goes much farther than sports, correct?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like I said, not just even my research, which looks at corporate locker rooms and whether they're in advertising and IT or in, sport leagues. And of course, the unifying factor is ownership. I mean, whether I look at a Fortune 500 corporations, the NFL, the wealth is concentrated with majority white elite men. So I'm going to see similar types of behavior. That is in no way, exceptional. And certainly I use this term commodification. I mean, everybody is a commodity. Some just have a higher value than others. But when we think about professional football, especially NFL and NBA, given what the percentage of players are who are Black and brown. And unlike, say, a corporate 500 corporation, I'm not going to see that percentage, 60 to 70% of employees who are Black and brown. That's what makes the NFL and NBA so incredibly, different. So this, what I call the deforming of identities, as Bill and Lawrence had pointed out. I mean, we can look at the legacies over 400 years of a racial hierarchy.
It's strange. I was reading an opinion piece by Lindsay Krause, and she's a former athlete, and she was talking about conservatives and right wingers and how this sort of behavior can be allowed to go on. And she's saying that those right wingers who say that Gruden is a victim of cancel culture don't have it right. He's really a person who has had the okay culture for his entire life, where people said, whatever that is you're saying, oh, that's okay. I kind of go along with that. What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, he resigned. I mean,
Right.
it's and yet maybe he would have gotten to a point after investigation that he would have been fired. I mean, I do think one needs to take measures not to be canceling people, but this is also about, we need to also, I think, remake these conversations. This is about professional behavior, okay? And if the NFL players, and we could say rightly so, issues of domestic violence, okay, abuse of drugs, those factors, we're going to address the players, and we have to have the same set of rules for elite men in power.
I want to switch gears and touch on vaccinations and the Kyrie Irving controversy. Lawrence, let me go to you first. What do you think of that decision not to get vaccinated?
Oh, wow. I think Kyrie Irving is one of the players that, for reasons that maybe he tries to be outspoken on certain things, he's been a target for, long before the vaccination thing. But I think even now, he's not being respected as someone who can make an intellectual choice. He's someone who is wasting away an opportunity for the Brooklyn Nets, and his particular beliefs, politics, become secondary towards this idea that there's a larger goal that goes beyond Kyrie Irving. And I think at the base level, there's no respect for his particular being as a man. And I think ultimately, when you see the commentary that becomes, everyday fodder on First Take, it proceeds with the idea that Kyrie Irving is selfish, and it doesn't actually give any respect to the fact that he has to make a choice like anyone else has to make a choice.
Mm-hmm. So I take it you don't believe the Nets did the right thing?
I mean, I believe that the Nets is probably doing the right thing, but I think Kyrie Irving, as a man, accepts the consequences of his choice. So ultimately, it's not one in which he should be ridiculed daily on television. It's one in which he's not able to play for a choice he made, like players in the NFL made last year, not to play. So ultimately, I think it should be as respectful as that. But I think, you create the controversy, and then ultimately you make someone like Kyrie Irving the punching bag for, what is not an easy issue to say, just get vaccinated and move on.
Bill, what's your take?
I don't denigrate anyone for any personal choice that they make, but Kyrie Irving, please understand, he wanted to be the man in Cleveland. Situation wasn't right. He went to Boston, found out he couldn't be the man in Boston. Situation wasn't right. He got together with Kevin Garnett. They came here to Brooklyn. They had this grand plan. Now, all of a sudden, somebody you made a plan with is no longer involved in your plan. That's from the professional side of it. Personally, it's up to him. He doesn't want to do it. That's fine. As Lauren said, he's paying the consequences. It's costing him about $19 million in addition to all the other public headache that he has taken on. Selfish? I think it is selfish in from the standpoint that he put his organization, that he put his teammates dead in the crosshairs of this thing, and it didn't have to be that way.
Okay, so there's still a lot to talk about when it comes to the Gruden emails and the state of racism in sports. We'll dive a little deeper after a short break. Super Bowl champion and ESPN broadcaster Chris Canty is going to join us and take us inside the locker room and front office of pro sports in just a minute. I'm Mike Gilliam, and this is Let It Rip.
You're watching CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
So, what is it really like in the league? Former Giants Super Bowl champ and ESPN broadcaster Chris Canty is here to offer some perspective. Chris, thanks for joining us. Does any of this surprise you?
It does surprise me from the standpoint that the NFL decided to weaponize select emails against John Gruden and that they haven't been transparent in releasing all the findings from the investigation on the Washington football team. And I think that's the thing that's concerning in all of this, because so much attention is focused on John Gruden and trying to defend his character and his track record. And meanwhile, the NFL hasn't legitimately reached out to the groups that were offended by the language that John Gruden used in those emails. And it leaves the question of, how pervasive are these attitudes in league circles, especially when it pertains to the higher up officials, people with decision-making power. It's something that players have suspected for as long as I've been a part of the National Football League. And yet this is just another one of those things that affirms that maybe the attitudes that the NFL has when it comes to these front office officials and team ownership aren't where they should be in 2021.
That's kind of what my next question was going to be. Do you think that John Gruden and his remarks are one isolated person's feelings, or do you think that these attitudes are kind of pervasive through front offices and the entire league?
Well, Mike, I think the short answer is we don't know the answer to that question, but the NFL could shed more light on it by being more transparent with the material information that was uncovered by Beth Wilkerson and her investigative team when they looked into the Washington football team, because there are other league officials, whether it's Jeff Pash, general counsel for the NFL and second in command to Roger Goodell. There were other officials in the front offices around the league that had sent email communications to Bruce Allen. So I think we could get a better idea of exactly how widespread this is if the NFL was more transparent with the findings from the investigation. But the lack of transparency leads to more skepticism that the NFL and a lot of the officials do share those same attitudes that John Gruden expressed to Bruce Allen in those emails.
Do you know Gruden?
I do know Gruden. I don't know him well, but I do know him. I've met him several times playing in the National Football League and then working for ESPN. Seems like a football person. That's his focus. That's his passion. But clearly there's something amiss when it comes to the attitudes that he expressed in those emails, because in my opinion, there's no place for that in our game based on where we want to go and based on the work that the NFL says it's trying to do as it pertains to diversity, inclusion, and then respecting everyone that wants to be a part of football. So from what I know of him, he was a football guy. But when it comes to leading men, leading a locker room, which is a very diverse place, I think that there's something amiss with John Gruden, and I think that's what forced his resignation with the Las Vegas Raiders.
How do you think the NFL goes about fixing this problem?
Well, I think they have to find a way to include people from marginalized groups and put them in meaningful positions throughout the NFL. That means head coaching spots. That means general manager spots. That means trying to work toward minority ownership in the NFL, trying to find more representation in the NFL league office in meaningful positions. I think that's the step that the NFL needs to take. We've saw that there's been some issues with the application of the Rooney Rule and teams trying to circumvent that and not necessarily giving legitimate interviews to coaching candidates each hiring cycle. And so I think that's reflective of the issues that the NFL is having in terms of making a commitment toward including people from diverse backgrounds in positions of power around our game.
Yeah, there's so many offensive coordinators that are excellent right now, but they don't seem to be getting the calls.
Yeah, Eric Bieniemy, Byron Leftwich. I mean, there are a lot of OCs, a lot of coordinators, period, that deserve an opportunity to be a head coach in the National Football League. And Mike, I'll do you one better. I remember when I came into the NFL in 2005, there were 7 Black head coaches in the National Football League. And now when we look around the landscape of the National Football League, you're talking about it being less than 5 minority coaches. So I think that the NFL is going in the wrong direction when it comes to trying to find pipelines, trying to find pathways in order to include more minority candidates within positions of power in these organizations. And it's unfortunate that we find ourselves in this position, but I think the record speaks for itself.
I think it's also frustrating to look at the NFL and say, you don't really have minority ownership.
Yeah, it is. It is. And the NFL has to figure out a way to move closer toward that. I know there have been some conversations about some potential candidates that have relationships with the NFL now with various campaigns around equality and diversity. We'll see if that materializes, but the NFL has to be serious about trying to find a way to be able to provide a path for a minority owner in our game. There's certainly some people that have been, linked to trying to, put together groups to purchase teams. But buying an NFL team is an expensive proposition. And so there's not a lot of people that have the ability to be able to go out and do that. But I think the NFL, when they put their mind to it, if they want to be creative about it, they can find an avenue to be able to get something like that done. So it's just a matter of how serious are the NFL owners about doing that. It's been referred to as a country club, and we'll see if they want to add minority members to their club. Right now, it sure doesn't feel that way.
Yeah. Another issue the NFL is facing is this whole thing of race norming on cognitive tests, tests for neurological damage caused by the sport, and them kind of changing the way athletes are tested and the grading of those tests so that cultural factors and those things are taken into effect. And in fact, that African-American athletes are judged differently than their white counterparts, and it's costing them when it comes to settlements. What do you think about that whole problem there?
Well, it's a liability issue for the NFL, and the owners have shown us every decision that they make is going to be governed by what's in the best interest of the bottom line. And so I'm not surprised that they try to use race norming to lower the baseline when it comes to cognitive ability to avoid having to pay out settlements to these players based on the damages that they've potentially done throughout their playing career. But to me, this is not all that dissimilar from what happened with the concussions in the NFL, being in denial about that for decades on end until they finally were forced to address it from the works of Ben Amalu and certain other, the Brain Institute in Massachusetts, certain other entities that actually brought this information to the mainstream. And so I think the NFL has been always slow to react, more reactive than proactive. And in this situation, I don't think it's any different, but I think the fact that we are having that conversation is going to move them closer to being able to do right by the players that have given so much to our game.
Okay. Before I let you go, I'm going to have to ask you one other question here. It's kind of a tough topic. Vaccinations. We've got this whole situation with Kyrie Irving at this point. How do you see the vaccination issue? Should players get vaccinated?
Yeah, Mike, I don't think there's any science that shows us that it's detrimental to your long-term health to get vaccinated. I get that as an athlete, your body is your business. And so you want to make sure that you do all the research that you need to in order to get comfortable with putting something in your body. But as it pertains to the COVID-19 vaccinations, I just think that this is something that all the players should do. And it's not just for you, it's for your family, it's for your teammates, it's for all the support staff that are affiliated with these teams, the coaches, the trainers, the equipment managers, the people in the arena that are working to serve you and to serve the customers. I think that's what's in the best interest of public health. And so while I understand the hesitancy from Kyrie Irving and from other players with getting the vaccine. I also understand and I side with the mandates that are in place because that's what's in the best interest of public health. It's tough when you talk about people losing their jobs because of mandates for vaccinations. But the worst thing about what's happened with this pandemic is people losing their lives, over 700,000 in this country alone. So I think we have to make sure that we keep the main thing, which is protecting what's in the best interest of public health. And that's why the vaccine is there.
Okay, that's going to have to do it. I want to thank New York Giants Super Bowl champ Chris Canty for joining us and giving some much needed perspective on the whole Gruden email controversy and race in pro sports. And remember, you can catch Chris on ESPN Radio's national show, Canty and Golick Jr. from 3 to 7 p.m. Chris, thanks again. And thank you for joining us. I'm Mike Gilliam. We'll see you next time on Let It Rip.